That's about as much sense as this film makes, honestly. Hello, fellow humans, and welcome to the second part of my review? It's more of a piss take, really. To the second part of my piss take of Braveheart, where I'm going through all its problems and inaccuracies for your education and amusement. If you haven't already, check out part 1, which covers everything up until the Battle of Stirling. But before I pick up where we left off, there's a couple of quick things I didn't cover last time, because I'm an Amadan. Like Mel Gibson's atrocious Scottish accent.
I came back home to raise crops and, God willing, a family.
And the occasions where he mercifully just stopped trying.
I was very young, but I remember Longshank's notion of peace.
And the fact that the label The Braveheart actually applied to Robert the Bruce, but that's not what the film is very heavily implying. And if you're at all doubting the impact of this film on modern perceptions of history, just Google search William Wallace. Yeah, I'm sure the real Wallace would love that this is how he's remembered. Speaking of which, let's get right back into this travesty. So now we come to the Battle of Stirling, which was actually called the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Where's the bridge, Mel? Apparently a local asked him this, and his reply was, the bridge got in the way. Aye, said the local. That's what the English found. Apart from its outcome, this battle bears almost no resemblance to its historical counterpart, where Wallace and the Scots defeated their overwhelmingly superior foe using clever tactics, not this. And no, this doesn't count.
On my signal, ride round behind our position and flank them.
We must not divide our forces.
Do it. And let the English see you do it.
They'll think we run away.
Take out their archers. I'll meet you in the middle.
This is such an obvious ploy that only the most stupid commander would fall for it. Or the most arrogant, I suppose. But I'll leave it at that. As the two armies now face each other off, let's take a second to talk about what they're wearing. Most of the Scots are wearing belted plaids, which didn't exist back then. In fact, no kilts were worn in Scotland until much later. And when they were worn, they weren't worn like they are in the movie, so they couldn't even get that right. If I was Scottish, I'd be ashamed. The English are wearing uniforms, as they were earlier, but military uniforms weren't a thing in medieval Europe. If anything, these soldiers would be wearing the heraldry of their feudal patron, but most wouldn't even wear that. I get that it's so the audience can tell them apart, but it still annoys me. And most of those English soldiers would not have had access to so much armour and high quality weaponry. In fact, the rank and file of both sides would have looked remarkably similar. And just to trigger me even more, Wallace and his posse show up wearing woad, which hadn't been worn as face paint since the Picts did it over 1,000 years before. The Picts also fought naked, but thankfully Mel didn't go that far. Wallace tells the cowardly nobles to go f*** themselves, which didn't happen, but it's still cool. But he says something odd.
I give homage to Scotland.
Back then, people didn't think in these nationalistic terms. People didn't fight or die for their country. They would have done so for their home, their family, or their feudal overlord. Even the nobility didn't think in terms of nations. They fought for personal, class, and sometimes religious interests. But that doesn't make for epic speeches.
But they'll never take our freedom!
More patriotism! Wallace tells the English to go f*** themselves, which he actually did, so that's cool. So the battle goes ahead. A couple of Amadans get themselves shot. And then the English cavalry charge, completely unsupported by infantry, because who needs those peasants? We got this, we got this, we got this. Oh, no we don't. No we really don't. Wait, did you see that? They actually included a frame where you can see the Scots are holding the pikes too early. Also, where did those pikes come from? They weren't there before the horses started charging. And don't tell me they had time to hand them all out. Anyway, the English cavalry get completely wrecked. No Scottish deaths, obviously. And as the two lines charge, we see one of the most famous continuity errors in film history. I'll just cover it quickly. Warhammer, Warhammer again, now nothing, now the sword, back to the Warhammer, and back to the sword. At least this film didn't get the Oscar for Best Editing, but it was nominated, and the kind of claymore he's using, which has become as iconic as the film itself, wasn't used until over a century after this. Why do I bother? Let's see how fair and balanced this depiction is. Nope. And no, I'm not counting the background, because no one does. So the Scots win. More patriotism! The victorious Wallace is appointed Guardian of Scotland. But remember what I said about the nobles last time? The Scottish nobles who started the trouble and led the resistance are portrayed as cowardly, treacherous and selfish. Well, now they're out in full force.
Now is the time to declare a king.
And you're prepared to recognise our legitimate succession, are you?
You're the ones who won't support the rightful queen.
Those were lies when you first wrote them.
Wallace quickly gets sick of it and spouts out the following.
There's a difference between us. You think the people of this country exist to provide you with position. I think your position exists to provide those people with freedom.
This is ridiculous because no one in the Middle Ages thought like this. No one. It makes about as much sense as him saying, but this film is propaganda, so whatever. You know what, I really should just give up now before my blood pressure does. Wallace offers his full support to Robert the Bruce in claiming the Scottish throne.
And if you would just lead them to freedom, they'd follow you. And so would I.
Although there's no evidence that he actually did so. And then Wallace invades England, which he did, and lays siege to York, which he didn't. He never got that far. Wallace then sacks York, and the film seems to very heavily imply that only the soldiers and the king's nephew, who wasn't actually there, were killed. But you know what sacking a city entails, right Mel? Widespread looting, raping and killing. And York was a large town, so that's a lot of people. Are we supposed to believe that they just let the civilians walk away? They brush over this fact, and Wallace tries to justify it by saying,
York was the staging point for every invasion of my country.
but that just makes him look like a vengeful mass murderer, not the freedom-fighting patriot he's supposed to be. Or is the film saying that mass murder is okay as long as you're doing it for freedom? What kind of message is that? That's probably why we see innocent Scottish civilians being massacred, but never English ones. In reality, Wallace and his army did pillage and burn their way across northern England,
Which was the style at the time.
and were morally no better than their English counterparts. But my patriotism! Anyway, Longshanks hears about this, gets pissed and throws the prince's gay lover out the window. I'm going to actually defend Mel for a minute here. People accused him of homophobia for this scene in particular, but I don't see how Longshanks' actions here can be interpreted in any kind of positive light. He's quite obviously a cruel man, and this could be just as much about the guy answering back to him as about him being his son's companion. And anyone who enjoyed seeing that happen is a dickhead. So King Dickhead sends Isabella, who is about 3 now, to offer Wallace a truce. Obviously this didn't happen, but we've got to get that romantic subplot going because this is Hollywood. And because Longshanks is a massive c***, he immediately leads an army north, which was his plan all along. Isabella warns Wallace about this, which she obviously didn't. Wallace pleads for help from the nobles, but they're cowardly and conniving.
With such a force arrayed against us, it's time to discuss other options.
Not like our common heroes, who are noble and brave.
We cannot defeat this army.
We can't!
Sir William.
And we will!
So the Battle of Falkirk happens, and once again it's nothing like the real thing. Mel manages to stick with the sword this time.
Irish.
This didn't happen, the Irish weren't there, and there was no fire. A lot of English people die though. There's one visible Scottish death, making this the fairest fight so far. Oh wait, no. The Scottish cavalry did actually pussy out, but they did at least attack first, and in their defence they were massively outnumbered, and it wasn't a straightforward betrayal like it is here.
I gave Mornay double his lands in Scotland with matching estates in England. Falkland turned for much less archers.
I beg pardon, sire. Won't we hit our own troops?
Yes, but we'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves. Attack!
Not only did this not happen, but it makes absolutely no military sense. If any medieval commander had done this, the morale of their army would have immediately collapsed, almost certainly resulting in a rout. This also relates to something he said earlier.
Arrows cost money. Use up the Irish. The dead cost nothing.
Manpower was scarce back then, so medieval commanders were often extremely cautious about risking unnecessary casualties, which is why pitched battles were actually very rare. But oh boy is he a c***.
Are we the baddies?
So we finally see some Scots dying. Oh no, I liked him. He was one of the best characters.
Some men are longer than others.
Your mother been telling you stories about me again, eh?
Fuck you, movie. So Wallace goes after Longshanks and is intercepted by... What? No! Just no. Bruce wasn't there, and even if he was, he certainly didn't fight for Longshanks, because Longshanks decided to pursue him as soon as the battle was won. Nor did he betray Wallace, although he did switch side a few times. He was quite the national hero. But my god, is this scene emotionally compelling. So Wallace goes medieval on the treacherous nobles, which he didn't, but this is really cool, so it's fine, and starts a guerrilla war, which he sort of did, except he asked Longshanks for more lenient treatment after being defeated at Falkirk, but that's not a very patriotic thing to do. He also went to France to beg the French king's assistance against the English, and considering the role that the French played in the struggle between England and Scotland, it's strange that Franco-Scottish relations aren't mentioned at all. I guess asking for foreign aid is also not a very patriotic thing to do. Because he's a Longshanks tries to use Isabella as bait to trap our intrepid hero, but she helps Wallace instead, and they bang. For obvious reasons, I'm going to skip over that entirely. Wallace gets invited to meet with the nobles and Bruce again. It's an obvious trap, but he thinks, f it, what have we got to lose? So he gets betrayed and captured, although he was actually captured by a Scottish knight loyal to Longshanks, and this scene didn't happen. But betrayal is more emotionally compelling. Wallace refuses to submit, or even to accept painkillers, because he's a man! Although in fairness, he really did say something like this.
Never in my whole life did I swear allegiance to him.
Which is pretty cool. Isabella begs King for mercy for Wallace, but because he's King he says no. Isabella then taunts the king with the knowledge that she's pregnant by Wallace.
A child who is not of your line grows in my belly.
Except this is physically impossible because she was 9 years old when Wallace died, and her son Edward III wasn't born for another 7 years. But whatever. Karma, bitch!
Your son will not sit long on the throne, I swear it.
And so Wallace is hung, drawn and quartered. Except that he's not drawn. Apart from that, this scene is amazing. Oh, felt that right down to my balls. King dies at this exact moment, because of course he does, whereas he actually died 2 years later while campaigning against the Scots again. So Wallace gets put out of his misery, and we skip forward a few years to the Battle of Bannockburn, because this movie is determined to cram as much nonsense into its last few minutes as possible. Bannockburn was the pinnacle of Robert the Bruce's 8-year campaign against the English, not simply a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Stop!
Bruce had no intention of kissing anyone's arse.
I hope you've washed your ass this morning. It's about to be kissed by a king.
The battle took place over 2 days, and again the Scots used clever tactics and the terrain to defeat the superior English army. But f*** that, more patriotism, Leroy Jenkins! And that's it. Thank God. Now that we've covered everything that's wrong with the film itself, I want to talk about Braveheart's biggest issue. Most people will watch a historical film and accept what it presents as the truth without doing their own research. The film's opening and closing lines,
"Historians from England will say I am a liar."
In the year of our Lord, 1314, patriots of Scotland, starving and outnumbered, charged the fields of Bannockburn. They fought like warrior poets. They fought like Scotsmen, and won their freedom.
make it clear that Braveheart is meant to be taken as a true story. It's no good the creators saying that it's not meant to be accurate if the contents of the film convey the opposite message. This oversimplification of historical events does the world no favours in regard to the perception and interpretation of history, however much the film did reignite interest in Scottish history in general. And what message does the film convey? The most enduring one is that the English were cruel bastards and the noble Scots were better off without them. Not one important English character is portrayed in a positive light. Not one. Even the prince's lover is portrayed as being a corrupting influence on him. People are really going to believe that things were that morally one-sided, that the English were evil and that Wallace was a noble and brave patriot, despite him actually burning hundreds of English villages and resorting to conscription and hanging of those unwilling to fight with him. And this allows xenophobia to support itself by reference to historical fact, which is something that xenophobes like to do, and it's much easier for them to do so when there aren't other major films about Anglo-Scottish relations, especially during this period. As Braveheart has become an ingrained part of Scottish culture, from football fans painting their faces
I am William Wallace! Wallace is 7 foot tall!
to statues of Mel Gibson as William Wallace, some of these sentiments came with it, to the extent that the film is being directly blamed for the Scottish independence referendum of 2014. There's absolutely no doubt that it helped contribute to the anti-English and pro-independence sentiment that made the referendum possible. And that's why Braveheart is still a problem. Because whatever your opinion on Scottish independence, those kind of major political decisions should not be based on a steaming pile of bullshit. So what do you think of Braveheart? Was I too harsh? Was I not harsh enough? And do you want to see me do more of these videos? Comment down below. Remember to like and share this video if you thought it was cool, subscribe for more content, follow me on my Facebook and Twitter if you fancy, and until next time, peace.